Great to be here with you all. And thanks, Ghazanfar and AIM Consulting team for setting up this fabulous event for us. Very pertinent theme and very well timed. Absolute pleasure and honor to be in the company of these illustrious business leaders from the Pakistan corporate sector. As ways we never anticipated or expected things to change in. And in some way, this virtual conference that we're attending right now is a prime example of how COVID has changed the way we consume content, the way we network for business, and so on and so forth. So, businesses of all sizes, shapes, and forms have had to evolve their value chains. It's not just B2C companies, even B2B companies have had to work. Those businesses which have kept the consumer experience at heart of their strategy have flourished even more in these challenging times. So consumer centricity, which was a key pillar for success for consumer businesses pre-COVID, I venture and say that now it's an opportunity or a challenge that even B2B businesses are contended to grapple with, and working backwards from consumer needs is the need of the hour. Let's spend the next 30 minutes with this esteemed panel to get their perspective on how, in their respective domains, they've seen a consumer experience evolve during the pandemic and where they expect to see things move in the future. So I'd like to call upon Mr. Amir, the CEO at Jazz, and hear his thoughts on what he believes are some of the aspects of change from this COVID disruption on consumer behavior, which should not stick, or which should ideally go away after we are done with the pandemic and in some way revert to the new normal. Some would argue the pandemic's probably, COVID's going to become like flu, it's going to become part of our lives going forward. But let's hear his thoughts on, what he believes in terms of consumer behavior should not stick going forward.
Thank you, Ali. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. So, yeah, it's Asif Aziz from Jazz, Chief Commercial Officer. A good question that you asked me about changing consumer behaviors. We, alhamdulillah, serve more than 70 million customers on a regular basis. So therefore, we have a good idea of what the country is feeling. First and foremost, when the pandemic hit us and there was severe lockdowns, we saw an enormous population migration take place. So a lot of the urban centers, there was an exodus of people moving towards rural and country areas, which presented me with a problem as a mobile network operator. I will be honest with you. My strongest network is in the cities and not in the villages. And everybody was migrating back to their domicile, their own villages, their own homes. So we were presented with an immediate problem. I was presented with a second problem, which was that when work from home, school from home was activated, we weren't actually ready for the unprecedented demand that would come through on data. We rushed to develop data plans that would be more relevant to customers during the day. So we saw an enormous socio-economic change that took place in the country that we were, I would say, unprepared for, and perhaps something not that we had considered. So that was the thing that we saw. The second thing that did actually happen, and I think this is fascinating, consumer behaviors have changed. And I'm often, in my social circles, maybe Amna might relate to this. They said, what accelerated the digital adoption of products and services? It wasn't the CEO vision. It wasn't the management team. It wasn't our actions. It was COVID. Actually, out of necessity, we've seen greater adoption of digital services. So our own digital services like the Jazz Cash product, people were able to send money very quickly. Our own Jazz TV product, we saw an adoption of digital services take place. So first thing, we saw an enormous change in socio-economic patterns. The daily wage earners from the cities moved back to their rural domiciles, so their behaviors changed quite dramatically. We saw an increase in school from home, work from home. So we saw a shift in the balance of usage. And the third thing we saw was an increased adoption of digital services. So COVID has acted as a catalyst for digital adoption. And I really hope this digital adoption stays with us because it's for the betterment of everybody's lives.
Thanks for those insights, Asif, and apologies for the slight mix-up. Amna, what would you add to what Mr. Asif said?
So hello everyone. So I actually totally agree with what he just said, because the digital adoption, or the shift towards e-commerce was not a planned process in which the whole ecosystem was created and then communication was put in place and then people were sent towards it. It just had to be done overnight. And we are a market in which 90 to 95% of the sale happens at retail, and only 5% to 10% in selected industries is happening online. But when this happened, we had to get the product to the consumer. So you can put all the communication up on TV and digital, but if the access to the product, the consumer can't walk to the store. So overnight, it had to be changed. So companies who had actually started off on this process earlier, when they weren't aware that COVID was coming, but as a digitization of their own company, they had started on this process, actually benefited from this because they had the first mover advantage. And other companies had to put in quick steps to get the whole process reversed, where if all the focus was on your retail and maybe not that much on online, and when retail is shut, you had to focus everything back on online. So in this way, the challenge that came actually accelerated the digitization of many of the companies. So the silver lining in the whole experience was that yes, things that could have taken many years or many reasons and approvals and processes actually had to be done overnight. So that was an interesting challenge that we were faced with, and then we had to sort of work towards it. The other thing that I would want to add in before we can move on is most of the focus went on necessity purchases. So luxury items actually went down in terms of the priority list. So companies had to refocus on what are the products that they want to highlight, because all of a sudden health and health consciousness became big and awareness of health became big. So reprioritizing on what sort of products need to go out. If you are selling a product, what is the larger purpose of this product? So all of that thought process had to come back into the planning and communication planning and the product planning at this stage.
Great. Just to add to what you said, having spoken to some e-commerce co-founders in recent times, at the outset of the pandemic, they mentioned that in terms of consumer adoption growth, they were within 3 months of the pandemic, they hit their forecast that they had projected to hit in the next 5 years in the Pakistani context. So that, tells you how much of an impact the pandemic had on consumer behavior in terms of digital adoption. Khurram, from the front lines of the consumer market, how was the dairy landscape impacted? Any key learnings, insights in terms of what you believe will stick in terms of change?
Hi everyone, and thanks, Ali. I think I would just add on to what the other panelists, Asif and Amna, has just said. And I think these guys have really articulated very rightly that how did it impact and how the reactions were. I would try to allude a bit in terms of that, what would happen now? What are the behaviors where we would revert back, and what are the behaviors which are very irreversible post-COVID? The 21st century has seen 3 very significant world-changing events. One was political, which was 9/11. The other was financial, which was 2008 financial recession and global financial turmoil. And the third one is very natural, which is COVID. Now, all these events have shaped the world in a way which it is very, very difficult for the world to go back to the originality when these events actually occurred. Lenin, not a very popular figure in the history, said something which is very significant for the current times, which said that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen, and we are exactly living through that particular time. To me, the COVID was, and there was a lot of digital disruption already. There was a lot of connectivity. The crux of the matter was that everyone in the world was very much connected, but no one was in control. And the post-COVID world needs to bring that control back and the learnings back. Having said that, while the consumers, the financials, the economics, the expectation of the proletarian from the bourgeoisie's governments and the democratic government, they would change a lot. But human behavior would not change much. As a human behavior, yes, there had been stocking, there had been price hikes, but as by and large, I am personally very impressed the way humanity came together to help each other in a pandemic world which had challenged the basic instinct of helping each other, being there when things were really, really odd. So to me, I think the humanity would go back to its natural physical inclusion into people's challenges and trouble and helping them out. But the world and its macroeconomic factors and macro factors of the world would not come back. And they would and should change for a better, which needs to be discussed.
Great thoughts, Khurram. Amna, on the point around which of the consumer behavior changes you expect to stick in the foreseeable future, any thoughts?
Yeah, so there was this research that I was actually going over. It's a McKinsey research. They conducted this on sentiment analysis of what people will stick to post things go back to normal. And actually 65% of the respondents said that they will stick to the new behaviors that they have developed during, this Corona time, and they will stick to this moving forward. So I think to a very large extent, the digital adoption in terms of be it e-commerce, be it, let's say, online banking, accessing banking via online channels, be it, how you're consuming content on digital. So I think these things will stick. People will, because they have, so there was a barrier to entry because people were not sure how will the experience be prior to Corona, prior to this, pandemic. But when they had no choice, they had to do it. So once that initial resistance was over, people realized that these are actually easier ways of doing things. It's actually more convenient, time saving. I don't have to step out of the house, and everything is there. So I think these things, especially the digital adoption in terms of e-commerce, banking, online content consumption or being connected. So these things will stick. So that, and I'm looking forward to that because I'm happy that they will stick. So.
Yeah, interestingly, here in the UK, when it comes to which consumer behavior change FMCG or retail players expect to be the most sticky, is the 60-plus-year-old retail shoppers, the grandmas and the grandpas who had never shopped online before the pandemic, having tried it for their grocery shopping, for their food delivery, and they are expected to be the most sticky ones in terms of post-pandemic transition on consumer behavior, because younger consumers might want hybrid experiences. They still want to experience life and go for breadth of experiences and all. But the older demographic consumer, for them this convenience dimension has been amazing. Asif Saab, your perspective from the communication world, and any thoughts on how I think the way payment and communication can potentially evolve in the Pakistani landscape over the next few months could have a huge bearing on our progress as a society as a whole, not just as industry and commercial players.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So, this is important, right? So some of the behaviors that have come that people that Amna mentioned earlier on, which is really right. I think there was no people were nervous. They weren't sure about online buying. They weren't sure what experience they will get. And then it was forced upon them when everything was closed. And then they tried it and they thought, you know what, this is not too bad. I actually quite like this. I don't have to drive my car halfway across the town, find a parking spot, go and buy the goods, and then bring them home. Somebody will deliver them to me. So I think these behaviors, I hope that they are going to continue and people will adopt this. And as a consequence of this, they will better their lifestyle. They can do things that are more relevant to them, not have to waste time shopping, food, similar. There are some behaviors that I think people were not happy about and they'll be look forward to put the back of that. I think homeschooling, whilst has had some benefit, I think people realize that children need social interaction to build their personalities, and they learn as much from each other as they do from their teacher. In the same way, most of us are working remotely right now, working from home, offices have been closed. It's not a bad thing to be able to work from anywhere as long as you're productive. We've discussed this internally about actually preserving the culture that we have. And the culture is just the way things are done. That's all it is. There's nothing more than that. And I think there is a desire to, just like there is for children who learn as much from their peer group, I think in the same way, people like myself who work in an office, we learn and grow from each other as much as it's, instructions from your line manager. So I think there will be a healthier balance. I don't think this whole concept of offices will be closed and nobody will come to an office and everybody will work remotely. But what it has done is it's taught us that you can work remotely when you need to, and you can be equally productive when you're remote, and you can be equally productive when you're in the office. So I think this behavior where we shifted all to offices, we won't stay all in offices, we won't be all remotely, we will have a balance. But on schooling, I have to say, there will be more classroom back to school. I think that will be one behavior that I think will probably revert back a lot more. I think children need social interaction with each other to be able to play, to be able to have some fun time, grow their personalities, grow their interaction with others, grow their human interaction. I think that's one of the behaviors I think will revert back. And on a personal level, more recently, there was this thing about indoor dining was closed. And when I turned up to a restaurant, I had a choice. Either they pack my food and I take it home, or they'll feed me in my car. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't comfortable with having a knife and fork in front of my steering wheel and a table in front of me, and somebody sat at the back that I can't see. And that wasn't a great dining experience. So I hope that dining experience doesn't stay with us, but it's a personal view only. I'm sure some people like in-car dining. I didn't really like it. So there are things that will change. And I think the statistic from the McKinsey research that Amna quoted, I read that research and it's absolutely spot on. A lot of behaviors are here now. And I think COVID acted as a catalyst to give us all confidence that this whole digital world isn't too bad. It's actually okay. It makes your life better.
Very well said. And yeah, I think the last few minutes, I sort of feel like you've taken me through a bit of a time journey through the pandemic, where at the outset, at least here in the UK, it was about people hoarding on toilet paper and pasta and whatnot. And, now we've come to a stage where we've sort of evolved and adapted to this new normal already in some ways. I think the biggest sector that is still yet to see what the future is going to be like is international travel and events and conferences. But I think the last 18 months have conditioned us significantly for what's to come. Now, in the last few minutes of the session, let me throw the sort of slightly more challenging curveball, the future gazing dimension of our conversation. Like, we know what has happened already. Any prescient perspective on what new trends in terms of consumer behavior might emerge? So just to prime the conversation, Amazon started with the vision of taking, e-commerce online. Books should never, books should all be sold online via these huge fulfillment centers somewhere outside of big big cities and consumption centers. And now here in London, Amazon's bringing back this hybrid model with in-store shopping and the touchy-feely side of human purchasing experience also being seen as something which consumers do want. So I I personally feel there is this gradual shift towards hybrid consumer journeys with online and brick and mortar experiences that are going to become the new normal. Anything that you, from your perspective on the business world, have seen that's yet to come to the fore? Let's start with Amna on this one, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I think I may have sort of slightly touched upon it earlier. I think businesses who have a purpose, a larger purpose, and not just a product will survive. Because as we see that now, with this pandemic happening, people are more self-aware of their well-being and of the money that they have and the choices they want to make. So products which actually make or have some purpose in a consumer's life, those are the products which have a connection with the consumers. Those are the products where I personally feel where the connection will grow even more. So that is there. So anything where the consumer can relate to that product, that's adding value back to their life, those sort of services and those sort of products will grow. Maybe over time, products will also, or brands will also realize that what value are they adding? How do they upscale themselves in terms of, is it just a product? Is it, what is the connection? So I think those sort of challenges will be put forward towards the brand. And that is how, when there's a personal connect, even if there is a pandemic, you can't step out, you would still have that connect. So, that is what I think will need to be focused on. We already know that the generation, the new generation, the generation Z that we call them, millennials and post generation after that. So they also all relate to products, or all relate to products well, which have a purpose behind them, and it's not just a product itself. So that I feel is something that brands will have to reposition, repurpose themselves. There could be reasons why brands were being consumed, or instances where brands were consumed, where the instances will have changed. I was reading this research, like for example, a chewing gum brand. There's a research about a chewing gum brand where they said that the reason, or the instances when people consumed that brand, was when they were waiting for a friend at a restaurant, or they were commuting during their work hour. Now, these small instances from consumers' lives have disappeared. There's no commute, there's no waiting for a friend. So now the brand needs to think of newer ways to connect with the audience. So the newer purpose of the brand. So I feel these are sort of things that eventually need the perception, or the positioning of the brands, will change. But I want to add one more thing. So Asif was just mentioning that, online education has its drawbacks. I completely agree, but for a certain age, beyond a certain age, when you're, let's say, college goers, I think it also brings forward a huge opportunity, because it cuts down your boarding and lodging costs, your travel costs. So maybe international education, which might not be accessible while we're sitting here, can probably become more accessible. So the universities now need to think in a different way. They can't have everybody on campus. So maybe they need to have on campus and online two sorts of, academic plans ready. So which I feel that because of that, the access to that sort of education, which was very costly, limited to a few people, will open up. Like we know that during this pandemic, lots of business models have changed, lots of new businesses have, sprout up. So I feel these sort of changes will come in, the things that were set in stone for years and years. So.
Very, very pertinent point you make. I don't know how the university students in Pakistan cope with it, but here in the UK, students have sort of been protesting to get, partial refunds for their fees, because they believe their academic year experience was, limited just to virtual interactions. So they feel like they've missed out on, the richness of on-campus life during the pandemic. So on the same sort of thread, a slightly more specific question. These in Pakistan, it seems celebrity endorsement, and now, the millennial segment in particular is getting influenced and hooked with the influencer marketing side of things. Any thoughts on how this space might evolve going forward? Is it a trend here to stay that will become even stronger in terms of how consumers are engaged with? Any thoughts, Asisa, Khurram?
Let me take that one. This is something that we explore, and this is something I do work in my capacity as chair of Pakistan's Advertisers Society. So this is something I'm very closely working with. Over the last 2 or 3 years, the marketing environment has changed. I think there was a time in Pakistan when a brand would be built on a television campaign alone. And people would build a 1.5, 2-minute narrative for their television. But unfortunately, the new millennials, they are impatient, and they are what I call the 3-second generation. They are hitting the skip button as soon as it, the skip. So you have to succinctly communicate your message in those 3 seconds. What you cannot do is you cannot create this montage for television and then find yourselves 3-second snippet that you can put onto digital. What you cannot do is think all of digital and video content is one universe. You have to break it down to the specific platform of whether it's an advert on Instagram, whether it's an endorsement on TikTok, or whether it's a Facebook campaign. It's going to be completely unique. So what I've got is a team here that actually builds unique campaigns for these particular audiences. And honestly, I don't understand some of these audiences' psychographics either. They are not my generation. They're even younger than millennials in some cases. They're Generation Alpha, the next generation that's come out since post-millennials. So actually, you have to build something a little bit more tailored for their particular needs. And I think as a consequence of that, video and video content marketing has become one of the hottest properties. TikTok is forever in the news. Snack video is in the news. YouTube is in the news all the time, because actually this is now where the customers are going, not where they used to go, which was on the television. So now brands have to think about how to evolve in order for them to stay relevant to the newer generations.
Yeah. Just to add on to what Asif said, I think this influencer marketing and this advertising as a whole is a one big thing that would evolve. It would have evolved anyways, irrespective of COVID as well, because of the generations that we are talking about, the Z and the millennials. But I'm particularly very excited about the post-COVID world, because we have taken the learnings of the COVID. There was a pre-COVID, there are the learnings of 2 years of COVID, and then now the world has to take the best of those learnings and move forward. To me, I think there are 3 things that we all have to do, because the countries will change, the customers will change, the consumer will change, the behaviors will change, everything will change post-COVID. So we have to be watching, be innovative, and be agile. I think, like, in the interest of this particular summit, there are more opportunities for a small entrepreneurial ventures and gigs than managing the supply chain of the very, very big and complicated multinationals. There are new moments, just to add on to what Amna said, there are new consumer moments evolving. There is a new consumer segment. We would have hardly raised as kids to get into the cooking and making the pastas and baking the cakes and making the other stuff. This kids cooking is an altogether different segment. And we used to, like, our parents, our fathers would start cooking at the age of 60 when they are retired. Now this generation has started cooking at the age of 12 and 14. So to me, that is a very, very important, and this is only one of many patterns. I think the world would go through the occupational transition. And my parting thoughts to the thought leaders and the future leaders here is that how do we equip? There was a study of McKinsey which says that 1 out of 16, the current workforce, will have to change their skill set by 2030. The COVID would only bring it back. So to me, it is remote training, it is more individual incentives, and it is the corroboration of once called socialist or capitalist divide. It is the corroboration of the public-private partnership to make sure that humanity as a whole makes this transition. And so I think that's very, very interesting aspect in my view.
Thanks for such a wonderful and uplifting closing to the conversation, Khurram. Always a pleasure interacting with leaders like yourself. Thank you, Asif. Thank you, Amna, for your insights. I pass the mic back on to the AIM Consulting team to take us through the rest of the agenda. Have a great rest of the event.